And I'm out of the hour, so hello to at very least Abbe, and perhaps to everyone else, depending on if anyone else is here. Once again, some changes to the rules today, so if you hear anything different, notice anything different sound-wise, let me know. Always worried about it, but always ready to do it. First things first, let's get Abbe the recognition they deserve. Head on over and add another tally mark in. Lucky key number 7. There we go. Always appreciate you, Abbe. You're probably still over at Harvey's stream, I'm sure, but yeah, I do appreciate it anyway. Now, what else today? No new followers, so I don't want to thank on that front. So the next thing I have is to announce the funny little badges I'm doing this time. So for those of you, of course, who know, I do like to do my funny little badges. We've got a couple. This time the special event is because the sun is trying to kill me. And so in honour of my new nemesis, the sun, I've created a couple of new badges. For the standard watch time badge, which I expect is the one that will get most use, we have the Wicked Sun. Nice little Wicked Sun, giving out some horrid light. Makes you too hot and horrid. And then if you do feel like subscribing at the same time, you have the Dark Sun, which is the same thing, but you can see more actively how evil the horrid wretched light of the sun is. Now this badge is going to be running the old while I am suffering from the excess heat that is here, and having to do my streams in the wee hours of the morning to avoid being so hot that I cannot stand it. So you got so what I'm told, this should run from today through to tomorrow if you want to get them, just for the watch badges. But yeah, those are available to you, and are not directly linked to any books that we're going to be doing. But yeah, what else? So speaking of those badges and the horrible sun, you might notice that it is much earlier in the morning for me than it normally would be when I'm streaming, so a little bit later for those of you who watch from America and that. But it is also Tuesday, something that I had forgotten in my suffering in the heat. And I did have a new plan for the Torrid Tuesday going forward, because I don't think the sort of fan fiction thing is really sustainable. I like the idea of it. I think it's a fun idea, but I just don't think there's enough out there to be getting on with. So instead of that, I think I'm going to make a shift that I think makes sense for a show named Torrid Tuesdays. And I'm going to move to a day focused on romance in literature, which is to say, you know, classic romance novels, things of that sort. And specifically, to start with, the plan is to go with Emma by Jane Austen. Why specifically Emma by Jane Austen, you ask? Well, it's very simple. I found a copy of Emma by Jane Austen. Hey, Naska. Welcome in. There's another badge going on, which, if you hang around, you'll get. And yeah, so Torrid Tuesday, I'm shifting to just a general focus on romance literature, because there's more romance literature out there than there is appalling fan fiction. Of course, in honour of the roots of Torrid Tuesday being you telling me what to do, if you'd rather than start that tonight, we can instead keep on going with the last of these M.R. James ghost stories, if you've got a particular preference, anyone. But yeah, plan is to do romance novels on Tuesdays. So yeah, the plan is, of course, I'm gonna Emma is far too long to do anything approaching a single season, so I'm gonna do a couple of chapters at a time, and this will be sort of a long-term project that I expect will take several months. But yeah, it gives us something to keep on theme. That's fair. We'll probably start with Jane Austen. But yeah, so I don't know how much we're going to get done today particularly. This is a quite late stream, and I mean, even if I wanted to go long, the reason that I've waited this long is because the temperature has finally fallen to below 30 degrees Celsius, and it will only be below 30 degrees Celsius for 2 hours exactly. So maximum time I could go is 2 hours, and I'm probably not going to be doing that. But yeah, we'll see what we got on. But I'll do a few chapters. Let's see, I think that's all the news that we got. Yes, badges, might have his new thing. So yeah, so that's all the actual technical stuff. So time filling. Yeah, so we were on the beasts the other day. And I guess if you follow me on the Bird app, you might have heard that part of the reason I wasn't streaming yesterday and the day was so hard was because the ward started spitting out beings made out of elemental fire because of the imbalance of solar energies. So I guess we should talk about the war beasts. Now, the war beasts is sort of a broad category of thing that I sort of lumped together. But basically, the way that the wards are set up in it, for those of you who don't know, I guess I've never explained this ever. So a ward is a set of like set magical defenses. It's basically an enchantment placed over a building or location or area, designed to protect it. And this the library is sort of catacomb, or not honeycomb with them. They're all over the place. You can see the big one down at the bottom of the library down there, if you want. And that's a pretty central one, but they're everywhere. And there's a very extensive set of wards. And when I say the ward beast, what I'm referring to is whenever there is too much of something in the ward is sort of calibrated so that it will bring itself back into balance. And the way it does that is by spitting out whatever is too much. So for example, when there was too much solar energy, it spit out fire beings. And sometimes there is too much of other stuff. Like for example, when a lot of the magical books sort of get destroyed, there's a lot of loose magic in the air. And so what it will do is it will dispose of some of that magic. And there's meant to be safe ways for it to do that, but they are all almost entirely broken. So instead what you get is beings made out of pure magic. And sometimes those are like little fairy creatures that are mostly harmless but kind of annoying. And sometimes those are like living storms, you know, sort of lightning and wind and force and all that stuff, sort of, you know, in a kind of like loose body shape. And these beasts are kind of notable because they don't come from the lower lands, which is where most of the beasts come from. And they're also a lot less grisly. Like there's less like physical to them, so they're not like. Well, sometimes there's some physical stuff to them, but there's mostly very little physical about them. So they sort of become this sort of unpredictable miasma. And there's a sort of plus and a minus to each of these. So the plus side of the war beasts is generally, because it's coming from an imbalance, there's only a temporary sort of expulsion of this whatever it is coming out of the wards. So they generally aren't very long lasted. Like if you're being made out of magic, you can't eat like paper or whatever. I mean, okay, well, that's not true. Some of the paper down here you could potentially eat. Like some of them will become self-sustaining, but generally speaking, when they come about, they're a temporary issue, right? They'll do their thing, and then after a couple of hours, minutes, days, whatever, how long the imbalance takes to sort itself out, they'll sort of die off. Some of the pure magic ones can go on to sustain themselves by hunting like the other magical artifacts in here, but the ability to consume magic from other things is pretty rare as it goes. So the best way you can sort of think of these ones is they aren't so much creatures in like the general sense. Like, that's not how I think of them anyway. They're more like phenomena, right? It's like a storm or a weather event. It's something that happens, and they're not generally very sentient or smart, but they're just, you know, something that comes about. And sometimes they're pretty like understandable. Like I said, sometimes you get ones that are like living storms or that are like little fairies, and you sometimes get the fire ones, but then sometimes you get weirder stuff. Because like, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and the library's broken up into a lot of weird categories. So sometimes you get stuff that's a little bit more abstract, like darkness. Now, what does a thing that is made out of living darkness do? Well, I don't know about all of them, but the one that I encountered ran into my eyes. Like straight into my eyes, just shoved itself in there, and I could feel it physically pushing its way into my. Well, I say physically, that's wrong. It's not physically pushing its way into it, but it like went into my optics, and I could feel it in there, and I couldn't see anything for about 3 days afterwards. Not because it did any damage or anything, but just like the way Lamb explained it is there was like such an abundance of darkness that it was overwriting any light that would go into my eyes. And what I wound up having to do is actually stand in front of a lamp and, like, judging by the warmth, just stare at his fire until such a time as all the darkness was consumed by light. So that was weird. And then sometimes you get more abstract stuff, and I don't really know what it is, so I can't say what it is that comes about it. But there was a time where I couldn't say anything but rhymes for a few days. There was a time that I did the same thing over and like. I say did the same thing over again. Maybe that's not right. Like I just have this memory of doing like a single, nothing of interest. Like I was walking along a corridor, but I remember doing it like dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Right, the exact same thing over and over and over again. But I didn't remember doing it each time. Right, just after I'd done it and it was finished for the last time, I had a memory of doing it dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Always like slightly different. It's weird. But yeah, stuff just happens sometimes, and you sort of like it comes out of the wards because they're not functioning right. And I do what I can to maintain them, repair them. But yeah, they're just weird. The rift beasts, or the ward beasts, I should say. But yeah, but those are the beasts. That's our lesson on the beasts today. And yeah, mostly they're not actually a particularly dangerous one, but they're just sort of an unexpected aspect that can sort of change things and sort of catch you unawares. So you've got to be aware of that if you're going to be in the library. And they're also not, part of the main sort of categories of beasts that I still need to sort of sit down and clarify my thoughts on before I do it. So, but yeah, so that's done. Had to go into Emma. As always, standard little patter. If I've gone over something and you've missed it, or you haven't heard very well, or you just want me to repeat, feel free to let me know. I'm always able to go back over something. If you have questions, thoughts, comments, feel free to stop in and let me know. I'm always happy to hear from you. But yeah, that's about it. I'll have a quick drink of water before we start, make sure I'm good and lubricated. And the plan is to go for a couple of chapters. But yeah, we'll see how we get on. I might just, I'll see how I'm feeling, but I think probably I'll try and go for about an hour and a half. But it will just come down to how things are going. But yeah, as always, I'll give a pause here for a moment for anyone if they have something to say that they want my attention for. And to just have another quick drink. Yeah, I figure that's not the case, so having done that then, and without any further ado, Emma, a novel in 3 volumes by the author of Pride and Prejudice, Anne Settler and Company, volume the 1st, London, printed for John Murray, 1816. To His Royal Highness, the Prince Regent, this work is, by His Royal Highness's permission, most respectfully dedicated by His Royal Highness's dutiful and obedient humble servant, the author. Chapter 1. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. She was the youngest of the 2 daughters of a most affectionate, indulgent father, and had, in consequence of her sister's marriage, been mistress of his house from a very early period. Her mother had died too long ago for her to have more than an indistinct remembrance of her caresses, and her place had been supplied by an excellent woman as governess, who had fallen little short of a mother in affection. 16 years had Miss Taylor been in Mr. Woodhouse's family, less as a governess than a friend, very fond of both daughters, but particularly of Emma. Between them, it was more the intimacy of sisters. Even before Miss Taylor had ceased to hold the nominal office of governess, the mildness of her temper had hardly allowed her to impose any restraint, and the shadow of authority being now long passed away, they had been living together as friend and friend very mutually attached, and Emma doing just what she liked, highly esteeming Miss Taylor's judgment, but directed chiefly by her own. The real evils, indeed, of Emma's situation was the power of having rather too much of her own way, and a disposition to think a little too well of herself. These were the disadvantages which threatened alloy to her many enjoyments. The danger, however, were at present so unperceived that they did not by any means rank as misfortunes with her. Sorrow came, a gentle sorrow, though not at all in the shape of any disagreeable consciousness. Miss Taylor married. It was Miss Taylor's loss which first brought grief. It was on the wedding day of this beloved friend that Emma first sat in mournful thought of any continuance. The wedding over, and the bride people gone, her father and herself were left to dine together, with no prospect of a third to cheer a long evening. Her father composed himself to sleep after dinner, as usual, and she had then only to sit and think of what she had lost. The event had every promise of happiness for her friend. Mr. Weston were a man of unexceptional character, easy fortune, suitable age, no, unexceptionable character, easy fortune, suitable age, and pleasant manners. There was some satisfaction in considering with what self-denial, generous friendship she had always wished and promoted the match, but it were a black morning's work for her. The want of Miss Taylor would be felt every hour of every day. She recalled her past kindness, the affection of 16 years, and how she had taught and how she had played with her from 5 years old, and how she had devoted all her powers to attach and amuse her in health, and how nursed her through the various illnesses of childhood. A large debt of gratitude was owing here, but the intercourse of the last 7 years, the equal footing and perfect unreserve, which had soon followed Isabella's marriage on their being left to each other, were yet a dearer, tenderer recollection. He had been a friend and companion such as few possessed, intelligent, well-informed, useful, gentle, knowing all the ways of the family, interested in all its concerns, and peculiarly interested in herself, in every pleasure, every scheme of hers. One whom she could speak of every thought as it arose, and who had such an affection for her as could never find fault. How was she to bear the change? It were true that her friend were only going half a mile from them, but Emma were aware that great must be the difference between Mrs. Weston, only half a mile from them, and Miss Taylor in the house. And with all her advantages, natural and domestic, she were now in great danger of suffering from intellectual solitude. She dearly loved her father, but he were no companion for her. He could not meet her in conversation, rational or playful. The evil of the actual disparity in their ages, and Mr. Woodhouse had not married early, were much increased by his constitution and habits, for having been a valetudinarian all his life, without activity of mind or body, he were a much older man in ways and years, and though everywhere beloved for the friendliness of his art and his amiable temper, his talents could not have recommended him at any time. Her sister, though comparatively but little removed by matrimony, being settled in London, only 16 miles off, were much beyond her daily reach, and many a long October and November evening must be struggled through at Hartfield before Christmas brought the next visit from Isabella and her husband, and their little children to fill the house and give her pleasant society again. Arbury, the largest and populous village, almost amounting to a town, to which Hartfield, in spite of its separate lawn and shrubberies and name, did really belong, afforded her no equals. The Woodhouses were first in consequence there. All looked up to them. She had many acquaintances in the place, for her father were universally civil, but not one among them who could be accepted in knew a Miss Taylor for even half a day. It were a melancholy change, and Emma could not but sigh over it, and wish for impossible things, till her father awoke and made it necessary to be cheerful. His spirits required support. He were a nervous man, easily depressed, fond of everybody that he were used to, and hating to part with them, hating change of every kind. Matrimony, as the origin of change, were always disagreeable, and he were by no means yet reconciled to his own daughter's marrying, nor could ever speak of her but with compassion, though it had been entirely a match of affection, when he were now obliged to part with Miss Taylor too, and from his habits of gentle selfishness, and of being never able to suppose that other people could feel differently from himself, he were very much disposed to think Miss Taylor had done a sad thing for herself as for them, and would have been a great deal happier if she had spent all the rest of her life at Hartfield. Emma smiled and chattered as cheerfully as she could to keep him from such thoughts, but when tea came it were impossible for him not to say exactly as he had said at dinner. "Poor Miss Taylor, I wish she were here again. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston never thought of her." "I cannot agree with you, Papa. You know I cannot. Mr. Weston is such a good-humoured, pleasant, excellent man, that he thoroughly deserves a good wife. And you would not have had Miss Taylor live with us forever, and bear all my old humours, when she might have a house of her own." "A house of her own? But where is the advantage of a house of her own? This is 3 times as large, and you have never any odd humours, my dear. How often we shall be going to see them, and they coming to see us. We shall be always meeting. We must begin. We must go and pay our wedding visits very soon. My dear, how am I to get so far? Randalls is such a distance. I could not walk half so far. No, Papa. Nobody thought of your walking. We must go in the carriage, to be sure. The carriage. James will not like to put the horses to for such a little way. And where are the poor horses to be while we are paying our visit? They are to be put into Mr. Weston's stable, Papa. You know we have settled all that already. We talked it all over with Mr. Weston last night. And as for James, you may be very sure he will always like going to Randalls because of his daughter's being housemaid there. I only doubt whether he will ever take us anywhere else. That was your doing, Papa. You got Hannah that good place. Nobody thought of Hannah till you mentioned her. James is so obliged to you. I am very glad I did think of her. It was very lucky, for I would not have had poor James think himself slighted upon any account, and I am sure she will make a very good servant. She is a civil, pretty-spoken girl. I have a great opinion of her. Whenever I see her, she always curtsies and asks me how I do, in a very pretty manner. When you have had her here to do needlework, I observe she always turns the lock of the door the right way, and never bangs it. I am sure she will be an excellent servant, and it will be a great comfort to poor Miss Taylor to have somebody about her that she is used to see. Whenever James goes over to see his daughter, you know, she will be hearing of us. You will be able to tell her how we all are. Emma spared no exertions to maintain this happier flow of ideas, and hoped, by the help of backgammon, to get her father tolerably through the evening, and be attacked by no regrets but her own. The backgammon table was placed, but a visitor immediately afterwards walked in and made it unnecessary. Mr. Knightley, a sensible man about 7 or 8 or 30, was not a very old and intimate friend of the family, but particularly connected with it as the elder brother of Isabella's husband. He lived about a mile from Arbury, a frequent visitor, and always welcome, at this time more welcome than usual, as coming directly from their mutual connections in London. He returned to a late dinner after some days' absence, and now walked up to Hartfield to say that all were well in Brunswick Square. It was an happy circumstance, and animated Mr. Woodhouse for some time. Mr. Knightley had a cheerful manner which always did him good, and his many inquiries after poor Isabella and her children were answered most satisfactorily. When this were over, Mr. Woodhouse gratefully observed, "It is very kind of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to call upon us. I am afraid you must have had a shocking walk." "Not at all, sir. It is a beautiful moonlit night, and so mild that I must draw back from your great fire. But you must have found it very damp and dirty. I wish you may not catch cold. Dirty, sir. Look at my shoes. Not a speck on them." "Well, that is quite surprising. We have had a vast deal of rain here. It rained dreadfully hard for half an hour while we were at breakfast. I wanted them to put off the wedding. By the by, I have not wished you joy, being pretty well aware of what sort of joy you must both be feeling. I have been in no hurry with my congratulations, but I hope it all went off tolerably well. How did you all behave? Who cried most?" "Ah, poor Miss Taylor. 'Tis a sad business." "Poor Mr. and Mrs. Woodhouse, if you please. But I cannot possibly say poor Miss Taylor. I have a great regard for you and Emma, but when it comes to the question of dependence or independence, at any rate, it must be better to have only one to please than two." "Especially when one of those two is such a fanciful, troublesome creature," said Emma playfully. "That is what you have in your head, I know, and when you would certainly say it if my father were not met by." "I believe it is very true, my dear, indeed," said Mr. Woodhouse with a sigh. "I am afraid I am sometimes very fanciful and troublesome." "My dearest papa, you do not think I could mean you, or suppose Mr. Knightley to mean you? What a horrible idea." "Oh no, I meant only myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me, you know. In a joke. It is all a joke. We always say what we like to one another. Mr. Knightley, in fact, were one of the few people who could see faults in Emma Woodhouse. I'm the only one who ever told her of them. And though this was not particularly agreeable to Emma herself, she knew it would be so much less so to her father, that she would not have him really suspect such a circumstance as her not being thoroughly perfect, thought perfect by everybody. Emma knows I never flatter her, said Mr. Knightley, but I meant no reflection on anybody. Miss Taylor has been used to have two persons to please. She will now have but one. The chances are that she must be a gamer. Well, said Emma, willing to let it pass, you want to hear about the wedding, and I shall be happy to tell you, for you all behaved charmingly. Everybody was punctual, everybody in their best looks. Not a tear, and hardly a long face to be seen. Oh, no. We all felt that we were going to be only half a mile apart, and we were sure of meeting every day. Dear Emma bears everything so well, said her father. But Mr. Knightley, she is really very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor, and I am sure she will miss her more than she thinks for. Emma turned away her head, divided between tears and smiles. It is impossible that Emma should not miss such a companion, said Mr. Knightley. We should not like her so well as we do, sir, if we could suppose it. But she knows how much the marriage is to Miss Taylor's advantage. She knows how very acceptable it must be at Miss Taylor's time of life to be settled in a home of her own, and how important to her to be secure of a comfortable provisioning, and therefore cannot allow herself to feel so much pain as pleasure. Every friend of Miss Taylor must be glad to have her so happily married. And you have forgotten one matter of joy to me, said Emma, and a very considerable one, that I made the match myself. I made the match, you know, 4 years ago, and to have it take place and be proved in the right, when so many people said Mr. Weston would never marry again, may comfort me for anything. Mr. Knightley shook his head at her. Her father fondly replied, Ah, my dear, I wish you would not make matches and foretell things. Whatever you say always comes to pass. Pray, do not make any more matches. I promise you to make none for myself, Papa, but I must indeed for other people. It is the greatest amusement in the world. And after such success, you know, everybody said that Mr. Weston would never marry again. Oh dear, no. Mr. Weston, who had been a widower so long, and who seemed so perfectly comfortable without a wife, so constantly occupied either in his business in town or among his friends here, always acceptable wherever he went, always cheerful. Mr. Weston need not spend a single evening in the year alone if he did not like it. Oh no, Mr. Weston certainly would never marry again. Some people even talked of a promise to his wife on her deathbed, and others of the son and the uncle not letting him. All manner of solemn nonsense was talked on the subject, but I believed none of it. Ever since the day, about 4 years ago, that Miss Taylor and I met with him in Broadway Lane, when, because it began to mizzle, he darted away with so much gallantry, and borrowed 2 umbrellas for us from Farmer Mitchell's, I made up my mind on the subject. I planned the match from that hour, and when such success has blessed me in this instance, dear Papa, you cannot think that I shall leave off matchmaking. I do not understand what you mean by success, said Mr. Knightley. Success supposes endeavour. Your time has been properly and delicately spent. If you have been endeavouring for the last 4 years to bring about this marriage, a worthy employment for a young lady's mind. But if, which I rather imagine your making the match, as you call it, means only your planning it, you saying to yourself one idle day, I think it would be a very good thing for Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston, if Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston were to marry her, and saying it again to yourself every now and then afterwards, why do you talk of success? Where is your merit? What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, and that is all that can be said. And have you ever known the pleasure and triumph of a lucky guess? I pity you. I thought you cleverer. But depend upon it, a lucky guess is never merely luck. There is always some talent in it. And as to my poor word success, which you quarrel with, I do not know that I am so entirely without any claim to it. You have drawn 2 pretty pictures, but I think there may be a third, something between the do-nothing and the do-all. If I had not promoted Mr. Weston's visit here, given many little encouragements, and smoothed many little matters, it might not have come to anything after all. I think you must know Hartfield enough to comprehend that. A straightforward, open-hearted man like Weston and a rational, unaffected woman like Miss Taylor may be safely left to manage their own concerns. You are more likely to have done harm to yourself than good to them by interference. Emma never thinks of herself as she can do good to others, rejoined Mr. Woodhouse, understanding but in part. But my dear, pray do not make any more matches. They are silly things, and break up one's family circle grievously. Only one more, Papa. Only for Mr. Elton. Poor Mr. Elton. You like Mr. Elton, Papa. I must look about for a wife for him. There is nobody in Highbury who deserves him, and he has been here a whole year, and has fitted up his house so comfortably that it would be a shame to have him single any longer. And I thought, when he was joining their hands today, he looked so very much as if he would like to have the same kind of office done for him. I think very well of Mr. Elton, and this is the only way I have of doing him a service. Mr. Elton is a very pretty young man, to be sure, and a very good young man, and I have a great regard for him. But if you want to show him any attention, my dear, ask him to come up and dine with us some day. That will be a much better thing. I dare say Mr. Knightley will be so kind as to meet him. With a great deal of pleasure, sir, at any time, said Mr. Knightley, laughing. And I agree with you entirely that it will be a much better thing. Invite him to dinner, Emma, and help him to the best fish and the chicken, but leave him to chase his own wife. Depend upon it, a man of 6 or 7 and 20 can take care of himself. That's the end of chapter 1. I'll have a quick swallow of water. So what is there to say about this chapter? We meet the titular character, Emma, and get a little note of her character, and being, the whole thing is essentially an introduction to her, isn't it? But also we hear some of her father, and of this Mr. Knightley, and get a sense of the village in which they are situated, and the plans going forward. I don't think there's too much else to say, it's mostly just an introductory part or chapter, but what is to say, I should say. Anyhow, another quick swallow of water to keep sure I'm fresh, and we will press on. Chapter 2. Mr. Weston were a native of Highbury, and born of a respectable family, which, for the last 2 or 3 generations, had been raising into gentility and property. He had received a good education, on succeeding early in life to a small independence, had become indisposed for any of the more homely pursuits in which his brothers were engaged, and had satisfied an active, cheerful mind and social temper by entering into the militia of his county, then embodied. Captain Weston were a general favourite, and when the chances of his military life had introduced him to Miss Churchill, of a great Yorkshire family, and Miss Churchill fell in love with him, nobody was surprised except her brother and his wife, who had never seen him, and who were full of pride and importance, which the connection would offend. Miss Churchill, however, being of age, and with a full command of her fortune, though her fortune bore no proportion to the family estate, were not to be dissuaded from the marriage, and it took place to the infinite mortification of Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, who threw her off with due decorum. It were an unsuitable connection, and did not produce much happiness. Mrs. Weston ought to have found more in it, for she had an husband whose warm heart and sweet temper made him think everything due to her in return for the great goodness of being in love with him. But though she had one sort of spirit, she had not the best. She had resolution enough to pursue her own will in spite of her brother, and not enough to refrain from unreasonable regrets at that brother's unreasonable anger, nor from missing the luxuries of her former home. They lived beyond their income, but still it were nothing in comparison of Onscombe. She did not cease to love her husband, but she wanted at once to be the wife of Captain Weston and Miss Churchill of Enscombe. Captain Weston, who had been considered especially by the Churchills as making such an amazing match, but proved to have much the worse of the bargain, for when his wife died after After a 3 years' marriage, he was rather a poorer man than at first, and with a child to maintain. From the expense of the child, however, he was soon relieved. The boy had, with the additional softening claim of a lingering illness of his mother's, been the means of a sort of reconciliation, and Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, having no children of their own, nor any other young creatures of equal kindred to care for, offered to take the old charge of the little Frank soon after her decease. Some scruple and some reluctance the widow or father may be suspected to have felt, but as they was overcome by other considerations, the child was given up to the care and the wealth of the Churchills, and he had only his own comfort to seek and his own situation to improve as he could. A complete change of life became desirable. He quitted the militia and engaged in trade, having brothers already established in a good way in London, which afforded him a favourable opening. It were a concern which brought just employment enough. He had still a small house in Arbury, where most of his leisure days were spent, and between useful occupation and the pleasures of the society, the next 18 or 20 years of his life passed cheerfully away. He had by that time realised an easy competence, enough to secure the purchase of a little estate adjoining Arbury, which he had always longed for, enough to marry a woman as portionless even as Miss Taylor, and to live according to the wishes of his own family and social disposition. It were now some time since Miss Taylor had begun to influence his schemes, but as it were not the tyrannical influence of youth on youth, it had not shaken his determination and never set him till he could purchase Randalls, and the sale of Randalls were long looked forward to. But he had gone steadily on with these objects to view till they was accomplished. He had made his fortune, bought his house, and obtained his wife, and were beginning a new period of existence with every probability with greater happiness than any yet passed through. He had never been an unhappy man. His own temper had secured him from that, even in his first marriage. His second must show him how delightful a well-judging and truly amiable woman could be, and must give him the pleasant disproof of its being a great deal better to choose than to be chosen, to excite gratitude than feel it. He had only himself to please in his choice. His fortune were his own, for as to Frank, it were more than being tacitly brought up as his uncle's heir. He had become so avowed an adoption as to have him assume the name of Churchill on coming of age. It were most unlikely, therefore, that he should ever want his father's assistance. His father had no apprehension of it. The aunt were a capricious woman, and governed her husband entirely, but it were not in Mr. Weston's nature to imagine that any caprice could be strong enough to affect one so dear, and, as he believed, so deservedly dear. He saw his son every year in London, and were proud of him. His fond report of him as a very fine young man had made Arbury feel a sort of pride in him too. He were looked on as sufficiently belonging to the place to make his merit and prospects a kind of common concern. Mr. Frank Churchill were one of the boasts of Arbury, and a lively curiosity to see him prevailed through the compliment, though the compliment was so little returned that he had never been there in his life. His coming to visit his father had been often talked of, but ne'er achieved. Now, upon his father's marriage, it was very generally proposed, as a most proper attention, that the visit should take place. There were not a dissenting voice on the subject, either when Mrs. Perry drank tea with Mrs. and Miss Bates, or when Mrs. and Miss Bates returned their visit. Now was the time for Mr. Frank Churchill to come among them, and the hope strengthened when it were understood that he had written to his new mother on the occasion. For a few days every morning, visit in Arbury included some mention of the handsome letter Mrs. Weston had received. I suppose you have heard of the handsome letter of Mr. Frank Churchill had written to Miss Weston. I understand it was a very handsome letter indeed. Mr. Woodhouse told me of it. Mr. Woodhouse saw the letter, and he says he never saw such a handsome letter in his life. It were indeed an highly prized letter. Mrs. Weston had, of course, formed a very favourable idea of the young man, and such a pleasing attention were an irresistible proof of his great good sense, and a most welcome addition to every source and every expression of congratulations which a marriage had already secured. She felt herself a most fortunate woman, and she had lived long enough to know how fortunate she might well be thought, where the only regret was for a partial separation from her friends, whose friendship for her had never cooled, and who could ill bear to part with her. Gonna pause here to have a quick another sip of water. She knew that at times she must be missed, and could not think, without pain, of Emma's losing a single pleasure, or suffering an hour's ennui, from the want of her companionableness. But dear Emma were of no feeble character. She was more equal to her situation than most girls would have been, and had sense and energy and spirits that might be hoped would bear her well and happily through its little difficulties and privations. And then there was such a comfort in the very easy distance of Randalls from Hartfield, so convenient for even solitary female walking, and in Mr. Weston's disposition and circumstances, which would make the approaching season no hindrance to their spending half the evenings in the week together. Our situation were altogether the subject of hours of gratitude to Miss Weston, to Mrs. Weston, and a moment's only of regret. And her satisfaction, and more than satisfaction, her cheerful enjoyment was so just and so apparent that Emma, well as she knew her father was sometimes taken by surprise at his being still able to pity poor Miss Taylor, when they left her at Randalls in the centre of every domestic comfort, or saw her go away in the evening, attended by a pleasant husband with a carriage of her own. But ne'er did she go without Mr. Woodhouse's giving a gentle sigh and saying, "Ah, poor Miss Taylor, she would be very glad to stay." There were no recovering Miss Taylor, nor much likelihood of ceasing to pity her. But a few weeks brought some alleviation to Mr. Woodhouse. The compliments of his neighbours was over. He were no longer teased by being wished joy of so sorrowful an event, and the wedding cake, which had been a great distress to him, was all ate up. His own stomach could bear nothing rich, and he could never believe other people to be different from himself. What were unwholesome to him, he regarded as unfit for anybody, and he had, therefore, earnestly tried to dissuade them from having any wedding cake at all, and when that proved vain, has earnestly tried to prevent anybody's eating it. He had been at the pains of consulting Mr. Perry, the apothecary, on the subject. Mr. Perry was an intelligent, gentlemanlike man, whose frequent visits were one of the comforts of Mr. Woodhouse's life, and, upon being applied to, he could not but acknowledge, though it seemed rather against the bias of inclination, that wedding cake might certainly disagree with many, perhaps with most people, unless taken moderately. With such an opinion in confirmation of his own, Mr. Woodhouse hoped to influence every visitor of the new married pair, but still the cake was eaten, and there were no rest for his benevolent nerves till it were all gone. There were a strange rumour in Highbury of all the little Perrys being seen with a slice of Mr. Weston's wedding cake in their hands, but Mr. Woodhouse would never believe it. That's the end of chapter 2. Bit of an odd one. We get a bit more of the social dynamics and backgrounds and the people surrounding it. A better idea of this Mr. Woodhouse, whom has so recently been married a member of the household. We get more of an idea of Mr. Weston, who's a funny old duck, but not an unpleasant sort. Just a bit strange in his manners. Anyhow, I shall have another quick sip of water and then we'll press on. Chapter 3. Mr. Woodhouse will fond of society in his own way. He liked very much to have his friends come and see him, and from various united causes, from his long residence at Hartfield, and his good nature, from his fortune, his house, and his daughter, he could command the visits of his own little circle, in a great measure as he liked. He had not so much intercourse with any families beyond the circle. His horrors of late houses and large dinner parties, and large dinner parties, made him unfit for any acquaintance, but such as would visit him on his own terms. Fortunately for him, Highbury, including Randalls in the same parish, and Downwell Abbey in the parish, adjoining, the seat of Mr. Knightley, comprehended many such. Not unfrequently, through Emma's persuasion, He had some of the chosen and the best to dine with him, but evening parties were what he preferred, and, unless he fancied himself at any time unequal to company, there was scarcely an evening in the week in which Emma could not make up a card table for him. Real, long-standing regard brought the Westons and Mr. Knightley, and by Mr. Elton, a young man living alone without liking it, the privilege of exchanging any vacant evening of his own blank solitude for the elegancies and society of Mr. Woodhouse's drawing-room, and the smiles of his lovely daughter were in no danger of being thrown away. After those come a second set, among the most comfortable of whom were Mrs. and Miss Bates, and Mr. Goddard, and Mrs. Goddard, three ladies almost always at the service of an invitation from Hartfield, and who were fetched and carried home so often that Mr. Woodhouse thought it no hardship for either James or the horses. Had it taken place only once a year, it would have been a grievance. Mrs. Bates, the widow of a former vicar of Arkwright, were a very old lady, almost past everything but tea and quadrille. She lived with her single daughter in a very small way, and were considered with all the regard and respect which an harmless old lady, under such untoward circumstances, can excite. Her daughter enjoyed a most uncommon degree of popularity for a woman neither young, handsome, rich, nor married. Miss Bates stood in the very worst predicament in the world for having much of the public favour, and she had no intellectual superiority to mark atonement to herself, or frighten those who might hate her in no outward respect. She had never boasted either beauty or cleverness. Her youth had passed without distinction, and her middle of life was devoted to the care of a failing mother and the endeavour to make a small income go as far as possible. And yet she was an happy woman, and a woman who no one named without goodwill. In her own universal goodwill, a contented temper which worked such wonders. She loved everybody, were interested in everybody's happiness, quick-sighted to everybody's merits, thought herself a most fortunate creature, and surrounded with blessings and such an excellent mother, and so many good neighbours and friends, and an home that wanted for nothing. The simplicity and cheerfulness of her nature, her contented and grateful spirit, was a recommendation to everybody, and a minor felicity to herself. She was a great talker upon little matters, which exactly suited Mr. Woodhouse, full of trivial communications and harmless gossip. Mrs. Goddard was the mistress of a school, not a seminary or an establishment, or anything which professed in long sentences of refined nonsense, to combine liberal acquirements with elegant morality upon new principles and new systems, and where young ladies for enormous pay might be screwed out of health and into vanity, but a real, honest, old-fashioned boarding school, where a reasonable quantity of accomplishments was sold at a reasonable price, and where girls might be sent to be out of the way and scramble themselves into a little education, without any danger of coming back prodigies. Mrs. Goddard's school were in high repute, and very deservedly, for Aubrey will reckon a particularly healthy spot. She had an ample house and garden, gave the children plenty of wholesome food, let them run about a great deal in the summer, and in winter dressed their chilblains with her own hands. It was no wonder that a train of 20 young couple now walked after her to church. She was a plain, motherly kind of woman, who had worked hard in her youth, and now thought herself entitled to the occasional holiday of a tea visit, and having formerly owed much to Mr. Woodhouse's kindness, felt his particular claim on her to leave her neat parlour hung round with fancy work whenever she could, and win or lose a few sixpences by his far side. These was the ladies whom Emma found herself very frequently able to collect, and happy was she, for her father's sake, in the power, though as far as she was herself concerned, it were no remedy for the absence of Mrs. Weston. She was delighted to see her father look comfortable, and very much pleased with herself for contriving things so well, but the quiet prosings of three such women made her feel that every evening so spent were indeed one of the long evenings she had fearfully anticipated. As she sat one morning, looking forward to exactly such a close of the present day, a note was brought from Mrs. Goddard, requesting, in most respectful terms, to be allowed to bring Miss Smith with her. A most welcome request, for Miss Smith were a girl of 17, who Emma knew very well by sight, and had long felt an interest in, on account of her beauty. A very gracious invitation was returned, and the evening no longer dreaded by the fair mistress of the mansion. Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody. Somebody had placed her several years back at Mrs. Goddard's school, and somebody had lately raised her from the condition of scholar to that of parlour boarder. This was all that was generally known of her history. She had no visible friends but what had been acquired at Arbury, and were just now returned from a long visit in the country to some young ladies who had been at school with her. She was a very pretty girl, and her beauty happened to be of a sort which Emma particularly admired. She was short, plump, and fair, with a farm bloom, blue eyes, light hair, regular features, and a look of great sweetness. And before the end of the evening, Emma was as much pleased with her manners as her person, and quite determined to continue the acquaintance. She was not struck by anything remarkably clever in Miss Smith's conversation, but she found her altogether very engaging, not inconveniently sharp, not unwilling to talk, and yet so far from pushing, showing so proper and becoming a deference, seeming so pleasantly grateful for being admitted to Hartfield, and so artlessly impressed by the appearance of everything in so superior style to what she had been used to, that she must have good sense and deserve encouragement. Encouragement should be given. Those soft blue eyes and all those natural graces should not be wasted on the inferior society of Arbury and its connections. The acquaintances she had already formed were unworthy of her. The friends from whom she had just parted, though very good sort of people, must be doing her harm. They were a family by the name of Martin, who Emma knew well by character, as renting a large farm of Mr. Knightley, and residing in the parish of Donwell. Very creditably, she believed. She knew Mr. Knightley thought highly of them, but they must be coarse and unpolished, and very unfit to be the intimates of a girl who wanted only a little more knowledge and elegance to be quite perfect. She would notice her, she would improve her, she would detach her from her bad acquaintances and introduce her into good society. She would inform her opinions and her manners. It would be an interesting and certainly a very kind undertaking, highly becoming her own situation in life, her leisure and powers. She was so busy in admiring those soft blue eyes, in talking and listening and forming all these schemes in the in-betweens, that the evening flew away at a very unusual rate, and the supper table, which always closed such parties, and for which she had been used to sit and watch the due time, were all set out and ready, and moved forwards to the fire before she were aware. With an alacrity beyond the common impulse of a spirit which yet were ne'er indifferent to the credit of doing everything well and attentively, with a real good will of a mind delighted with its own ideas, did she then do all the honours of the meal, and help and recommend the minced chicken and scalloped oysters with an urgency which she knew would be acceptable to the early hours and civil scruples of their guests. Upon such occasions poor Mr. Woodhouse's feelings were in sad warfare. He loved to have the cloth laid, because it had been the fashion of his youth, but his conviction of suppers being very unwholesome made him rather sorry to see anything put on it, and while his hospitality would have welcomed his visitors to everything, his care for their health made him grieve that they would eat. Such another small basin of thin gruel as his own, were all that he could, with a thorough self-approbation, recommend, though he might constrain himself, while the ladies were comfortably clearing their nicer things, to say, "Miss Bates, let me propose your venturing on one of these eggs. An egg boiled very soft is not unwholesome. Searle understands boiling an egg better than anybody. I would not recommend an egg boiled by anybody else. You need not be afraid. They are very small, you see. One of our small eggs will not hurt you. Miss Bates, let Emma help you to a little bit of tart, a very little bit. Ours are all apple tarts. You need not be afraid of unwholesome preserves here. I do not advise the custom. Mrs. Goddard, what say you to half a glass of wine? A small half glass. Put into a tumbler of water? I do not think I could disagree with you." Emma allowed her father to talk, but supplied her visitors in a much more satisfactory style, and on the present evening had particular pleasure in sending them away happy. The happiness of Miss Smith were quite equal to her intentions. Miss Woodhouse was so great a personage in Arbury that the prospect of the introduction had given as much panic as pleasure. But the humble, grateful little girl went off with an highly gratified feeling, delighted with the affability with which Miss Woodhouse had treated her all evening, and actually shaken hands with her at last. That's the end of chapter 3. And quite a good bit of time in there, because we are just shy of a minute off from the ad break. So I'll do my little bit of assessment there. So here we are again, meeting more of the personages of the piece, expanding the sort of social circle and coming to understand more of the characters. We see again more of Mr. Was it Woodhouse? No, was it Woodhouse? No, yeah, it was Woodhouse, yeah. But we see more of the personage of Mr. Woodhouse, who, again, interesting on an odd duck. And we see Miss Smith, who is likely to be, in my mind at least, the person whom Emma intends to make a match with. The, was it a vicar? Whom she proposed to find one. Yeah. Not much more to say on the piece, but again, we are about to come into the ad break, so I won't start the next chapter until that's run through. I'll probably do only the one more. But yeah. And for anyone who is not in ads, what will we talk of? I guess a little bit of the shape of the novel that's coming out from these 3 chapters we've had so far. First, I'll have a drink of water while I remember. But yeah, from what I can ascertain, it seems pretty clear this novel is very much concerned with the people involved, with small moments and little things that are ongoing, and the particulars of, how do you say, of the minutiae of social life. I mean, we're still in a small country town, and we've had some mention of the big city in London, and it seems like connection is going to be the thing. Though the story being called Emma, I imagine that her arc or story is going to be the central one to the narrative. But it does not seem loath to sort of go off when it introduced us to various other personages and characters in the little town and community, and even gives quite a bit of time to the eccentric old father. Now, whether that's because he'll be important in the main story, or whether it is just the author taking some time and indulging themselves, we'll, I suppose, find out as we go. Yeah, I think I like it so far. The voice is a little flowery, which I don't mind in reading, although it does sometimes get me tripping over myself. I'm trying to take it a little bit slower and more sort of, how'd you put it? I know that I sometimes rush when I'm reading, which I think, on listening back to it, is not great to listen to, so I'm trying to be a bit more careful with this one, and have it be a bit more measured in pace. But even in doing that, I do find myself stumbling here and there over a couple of words, and when I stumble I tend to panic a bit and then rush a little, which doesn't help things. So I wish the voice were a little bit simpler for that sake, but I don't think it's unpleasant to read at all. I think it's quite nice indeed. I am, however, going to struggle enormously to keep the name straight. I just know that of myself. Not a fault with the novel, a fault with me. Congratulations, Abba. Yeah, you got that would be the Wicked Sun badge, which is celebrating how much the sun is absolutely devastating me at the moment. It's important to acknowledge a worthy enemy. But yeah, I guess I can go. Yeah, I'll stop over here with a little time left in the outbreak. We do have the Wicked Sun badge for anyone viewing, and the Dark Sun badge for anyone who wants to subscribe during the time. I don't like having the subscriber badge. You're very welcome, Amber. I very much appreciate you being here. Yeah. I don't love that you have to have a I don't love that you have to have a subscriber badge to be able to do a view-time badge. I'd like to just do a normal one. I feel a bit scummy having like a come and subscribe to me badge, but Twitch won't let you have one without the other, and honestly it's probably for the best, because if it was up to me I would never ask people to give me any money ever, because I never think of it. And also, I don't get money, I just get cheese. But Lamp says it's very important that we get enough money to repair the water at some point, so we've got to do something. But yeah, I like making the badges, they're fun. I hope you enjoy them. As far as I can tell, there is no limit to how many you can do, so anytime I feel the motivation, I'm going to make one. This one is running through tomorrow, so well, I guess I don't know why I'm pushing it now. Like, yeah, turn up tomorrow if you want to get it. You've just got it. Yeah. Anyhow, ad break is over. All my thoughts is given. So I'm gonna have one more swallow of water, and then we're gonna do. I think we'll just do one more chapter. Maybe we'll push through chapter 5. We'll see how we feel. If chapter 4 is a short one, we'll probably push on through 5. But I don't want to go too long, given how late it is. So yeah. Chapter 4. Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often. And as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other. As a walking companion, Emma had very early foreseen how useful she might find her. In that respect, Mrs. Weston's loss had been important. Her father never went beyond the shrubbery, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk, or his short as the year varied. And since Mrs. Weston's marriage, her exercise had been too much confined. She had ventured once alone to Randalls, but it were not pleasant, and an Harriet Smith, therefore, one whom she could summon at any time to walk, would be a valuable addition to her privileges. But in every respect, as she saw more of her, she approved of her, and were confirmed in all kind designs. Harriet certainly were not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, were totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guarded by anyone she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself were very amiable, and her inclination for a good company, and power of appreciating what were elegant and clever, showed that there were no want of taste, no strength of understanding must not be expected. Altogether, she was quite convinced of Harriet Smith's being exactly the young friend she wanted, exactly something which her own required. Such a friend as Mrs. Weston were out of the question. 2 such could ne'er be granted. 2 such she did not want. It were quite a different sort of thing, a sentiment distinct and independent. Mrs. Weston were the object of regard, which had in its basis gratitude and esteem. Harriet would be loved as one to whom she could be useful. For Mrs. Weston there were nothing to be done, for Harriet everything. Her first attempts at usefulness were an endeavour to find out who were the parents, but Harriet could not tell. She was ready to tell everything in her power, but on this subject questions were vain. Emma were obliged to fancy what she liked, but she could never believe that in the same situation she should not have discovered the truth. Harriet had no penetration. She had been satisfied to hear and believe just what Mrs. Goddard chose to tell her, and looked no farther. Mrs. Goddard and the teachers and the girls and the affairs of the school in general formed naturally a great part of her conversation. But for her acquaintance with the Martins of Abbey Mill Farm, it must have been the old. But the Martins occupied her thoughts a good deal. She had spent 2 very happy months with them, and now loved to talk of the pleasures of her visits, and describe the many comforts and wonders of the place. Emma encouraged her talkativeness, amused by such a picture of another set of beings, and enjoying the youthful simplicity which could speak with so much exultation of Mrs. Martin's having 2 parlours, 2 very good parlours indeed, one of them quite as large as Mrs. Goddard's drawing room, and of her having an upper maid who had lived 25 years with her, and of their having 8 cows, 2 of them Alderneys, and 1 little Welsh cow, a very pretty little Welsh cow indeed, and of Mrs. Martin's saying, as she was so fond of it should be called her cow, and of their having a very handsome summer house in their garden, where some day next year they were all to drink tea, a very handsome summer house, large enough to hold 12 people. For some time she were amused, without thinking beyond the immediate cause. As she come to understand the family better, other feelings arose. She had taken up a wrong idea, fancying it were a mother and daughter, a son and a son's wife, who all lived together. When it appeared that Mr. Martin bore a part in the narratives, and were always mentioned with the approbation. Yeah, enjoy Naska. You're at the Wicked Sun badge. But when it appeared that Mr. Martin, who bore a part in the narrative, and were always mentioned with approbation for his great good nature in doing something or other, were a single man, and there were yet no young Mrs. Martin, no wife in the case, she did suspect danger to her poor little friend from all the hospitality and kindness, and that if she were not taken care of, she might be required to sink herself forever. With this inspiriting notion, her questions increased in number and meaning, and she particularly led Harriet to talk more of Mr. Martin, and there were evidently no dislike to it. Harriet were very ready to speak of the share he had in their moonlight walks and merry evening games, and dwelt a good deal upon his being so very good-humoured and obliging. He has gone 3 miles round him one day in order to bring her some walnuts, because she had said how fond she was of them, and everything else he was so very obliging. He had his shepherd's son into the parlour one night on purpose to sing to her. She was very fond of singing. He could sing a little himself. She believed he was very clever and understood everything. He had a very fine flock, and while she was with them he had bid more for his wool than anybody in the country. She believed everybody spoke well of him. His mother and sisters were very fond of him. Mrs. Martin had told her one day, and there were a blush as she said it, that it were impossible for anybody to be a better son, and therefore she was sure whenever he married he would make a good husband. Not that she wanted him to marry. She was in no hurry at all. Well done, Mrs. Martin, thought Emma. You know what you are about. And when she had come away, Miss Martin was so very kind as to send Mrs. Goddard a beautiful goose, the finest goose Mrs. Goddard had ever seen. Mrs. Goddard had dressed it on Sunday, and asked all 3 teachers, Miss Nash and Miss Pierce, and Miss Prince and Miss Richardson, to sup with her. Mr. Martin, I suppose, is not a man of information beyond the line of his own business. He does not read? Oh, yes. Now that is no, I do not know. But I believe he has read a good deal, but not what you would think of anything of. He reads the agricultural reports and some other books that lay in on the window seats, but he reads all them to himself. But sometimes of an evening, before we went to cards, he would read something aloud out of the elegant extracts. Very entertaining. And I know he has read The Vicar of Wakefield. He never read The Romance of the Forest, nor The Children of the Abbey. He had never heard of such books before I mentioned them, but he is determined to get them now as soon as ever he can. The next question was, what sort of looking man is Mr. Martin? Oh, not handsome, not at all handsome. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. One does not, you know, after a time. But did you never see him? He is in Highbury every now and then, and he is sure to ride through every week on the way to Kingston. He has passed you very often. That may be, and I may have seen him 50 times, without having any idea of his name. A young farmer, whether on horseback or on foot, is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or 2 lower, and a credible appearance might interest me. I might hope to be useful to their families in some way or other, but a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore in one sense as much above my notice as in every other he is below it. To be sure. Ah, yes, it is not likely you should ever have observed him, but he knows you very well indeed. I mean by sight. I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man. I know indeed that he is so, and as such will wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be? He was 24 the 8th of last June, and my birthday is the 23rd, just a fortnight and a day's difference, which is very odd. Only 24? That is too young to settle. His mother is perfectly right not to be in a hurry. They seem very comfortable as they are, and if she were to take any pains to marry him, she would probably repent it. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of young woman in the same rank as his own, with a little money, it might be very desirable. 6 years hence? Dear Miss Woodhouse, he would be 30 years old. Well, and that is exactly as early as most men can afford to marry, who are not born to an independence. Mr. Martin, I imagine, has his fortune entirely to make, cannot be at all beforehand with the world. Whatever money he might come into when his father died, whatever his share of the family property, it is, I dare say, all afloat, all employed in his stock and so forth. And though, with diligence and good luck, he may be rich in time, it is next to impossible that he should have realized anything yet. To be sure, it is so. So it is. They live very comfortably. They have no indoors man, else they do not want for anything. And Mrs. Martin talks of taking a boy another year. I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet, whenever he does marry. I mean, as to being acquainted with his wife. Although his sisters, from a superior education, are not to be altogether objected to, it does not follow that he might marry anybody at all fit for you to notice. The misfortunes of your birth ought to make you particularly careful of your associates. There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your own powers, or there will be plenty of people who would take pleasure in degrading you. Yes, to be sure. I suppose there are. But while I visit Harriet Hartfield, and you are so kind to me, Miss Woodhouse, I am not afraid of what anybody could do. You understand the force of influence pretty well, Harriet, but I would have you so firmly established in good society as to be independent even of Hartfield and Miss Woodhouse. I want to see you permanently well connected, and to that end it would be advisable to have as few odd acquaintances as may be, and therefore I say that if you should still be in this country when Mr. Martin marries, I wish you may not be drawn in by your intimacy with the sisters to be acquainted with the wife, who will probably be some mere farmer's daughter without education. To be sure. Yes. Not that I think Mr. Martin would ever marry anybody but what had some education, and been very well brought up. However, I do not mean to set my opinion against yours. I am sure I shall not wish for the acquaintance of his wife. I shall always have a great regard for the Miss Martins, especially Elizabeth, and should be very sorry to give them up, for they are quite as well educated as me. But if he marries a very ignorant, vulgar woman, certainly I had better not visit her, if I can help it. Emma watched her through the fluctuations of his speech, and saw no alarming symptoms of love. The young man had been the first admirer, but she trusted there were no other old, and there would be no serious difficulty on Harriet's side to impose any friendly arrangements of her own. They met Mr. Martin the very next day, as they was walking on the Downwell Road. He were on foot, and after looking very respectfully at her, looked with most unfeigned satisfaction at her companion. Emma were not sorry to have such an opportunity of survey, and, walking a few yards forward, while they talked together, soon made her quick eye sufficiently acquainted with Mr. Robert Martin. His appearance were very neat, and he looked like a sensible young man, but his person had no other advantage, and when he come to be contrasted with gentlemen, she thought he must lose all ground he had gained in Harriet's inclination. Harriet were not insensible of manner. She had voluntarily noticed her father's gentleness with admiration as well as wonder. Mr. Martin looked as if he did not know what manner were. They remained but a few minutes together, as Miss Woodhouse must not be kept waiting, and Harriet then come running up to her with a smiling face and in a flutter of spirits, which Miss Woodhouse hoped very soon to compose. Only think of her happening to meet him. How very odd. It was quite a chance, he said, that he had not gone round by Randalls. He did not think we ever walked this road. He thought we walked towards Randalls most days. He has not been able to get to the romance of the forest yet. He was so busy the last time he was at Kingston that he quite forgot it. But he goes again tomorrow. So very odd we should happen to meet. Well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him? Do you think him so very plain? He is very plain, undoubtedly. Remarkably plain. But that is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility. I had no right to expect much, and I did not expect much, but I had no idea that he could be so very clownish, so totally without air. I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility. To be sure, said Harriet, in a mortified voice. He is not so genteel as a real gentleman. I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some such very real gentlemen. You must yourself be struck with the difference in Mr. Martin. At Hartfield you have had very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men, and I should be surprised if, after seeing them, you could be in company with Mr. Martin again without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature, and rather wondering at yourself for having ever thought him agreeable at all before. Do you not begin to feel that now? Are not you struck? I am sure you must have been struck by his awkward look and abrupt manner, and the uncouthness of a voice, which I heard to be wholly unmodulated as I stood here. Certainly he is not like Mr. Knightley. He has not such a fine air and way of walking as Mr. Knightley. I see the difference plain enough, but Mr. Knightley is so very fine a man. Mr. Knightley's air is so remarkably good, that is not fair to compare Mr. Martin with him. You might not see one in 100 with gentlemen so plainly written as in Mr. Knightley, but he is not the only gentleman you have been lately used to. What say you to Mr. Weston and Mr. Elton? Compare Mr. Martin with either of them. Compare their manner of carrying themselves, of walking, of speaking, of being silent. You must see the difference. Oh yes, there is a great difference. Mr. Weston is almost an old man. Mr. Weston must be between 40 and 50, which makes his good manners the more valuable. The older a person grows, Harriet, the more important it is that their manners should not be bad. The more glaring and disgusting any loudness or coarseness or awkwardness becomes. What is passable in youth is detestable in later age. Mr. Martin is now awkward and abrupt. What will he be at Mr. Weston's time of life? There is no saying indeed, replied Harriet rather solemnly. But there may be a pretty good guessing. He will be a completely gross, vulgar farmer, totally inattentive to appearances, and thinking of nothing but profit and loss. Will he indeed? That would be very bad. How much his business engrosses him already is very plain from the circumstance of his forgetting to inquire for the book you recommended. He was a great deal too full of the market to think of anything else, which is just as it should be for a thriving man. What has he to do with books? And I have no doubt that he will thrive and be a very rich man in time, and his being illiterate, of course, need not disturb us. I wonder if he did not remember the book, was all Harriet's answer, and spoken with a degree of grave displeasure, which Emma thought might be selfishly left to itself. She therefore said no more for some time. Her next beginning were, in one respect, perhaps, Mr. Elton's manners are superior to Mr. Knightley's or Mr. Weston's. They have more gentleness. They might be more safely held up as a pattern. There is an openness, a quickness, almost a bluntness in Mr. Weston, which everybody likes in him, because there is too much good humour in it with it. But that would not do to be copied. Neither would Mr. Knightley's downright decided, commanding sort of manner, though it suits him very well. His figure and look and situation in life seem to allow it. But if any young man were to set about copying him, he would not be sufferable. On the contrary, I think a young man might be very safely recommended to take Mr. Elton as a model. Mr. Elton is good-humoured, cheerful, obliging, and gentle. He seems to me to be grown particularly gentle of late. I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, by additional softness, but it strikes me that his manners are softer than they used to be. If he means anything, it must be to please you. Did I not tell you what he said of you the other day? She then repeated some warm personal praise which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did full justice to her, and Harriet blushed and smiled, and said she had always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable. Mr. Elton was the very person fixed on by Emma for driving the young farmer out of Harriet's End. She thought it would be an excellent match, and only too palpably desirable, natural, and profitable for out of much merit in planning it. She feared it were what everybody else must think of and predict. It were not likely, however, that anybody should have equalled her in the date of the plan, as it had entered her brain during the very first evening of Harriet's coming to Hartfield. The longer she considered it, the greater was her sense of its expediency. Mr. Elton's situation was most suitable, quite the gentleman himself, and without low connections. At the same time, not any of the family that could fairly object to the doubtful birth of Harriet. He had a comfortable home for her, and Emma imagined a very sufficient income, for though the vicarage of Arbury were not large, he were known to have some independent property, and she thought very highly of him as a good-humoured, well-meaning, respectable young man, without any deficiency or useful understanding or knowledge of the world. She had already satisfied herself that he thought Harriet a beautiful girl, which he trusted, with such frequent meetings at Hartfield, were foundation enough on his side, and on Harriet's there could be little doubt that the idea of being preferred by him would have all the usual weight and efficacy. And he was really a very pleasing young man who any woman not fastidious might like. He was reckoned very handsome, his person much admired in general, though not by her, there being a want of elegance of features which she could not dispense with. But the girl who could be gratified by a Robert Martin's riding about the country to get walnuts for her might very well be conquered by Mr. Elton's admiration. And that's the end of chapter 4. Which I mean, is pretty clearly just the setting up of, well, the first, I guess even, not even the setting up, the first sort of laying of the groundwork of, yeah, a match that we predicted between Mr. Elton and Mrs. Smith. I'm tempted to do another chapter, but I know that if I push too long, I'm just going to sort of ruin my whole day tomorrow, so I think we should call it there with this first part. 4 chapters ain't too bad. And yeah, we've done a little bit of commentary after each one, but let's give it a little bit of a summary overall, shall we? So, we focus on this story of Emma, a young woman of independence, sole remaining daughter in the household of a wealthy country gentleman, who has decided that she is a skilled matchmaker. And we begin to see the community of the large village, almost a small town around her, and the people within it whom she intends to, well, presumably matchmake, and the surrounding cast. A particular note is, of course, Harriet and Mr. Elton, the matchmakers in chief, and Mr. Woodhouse, her father, who is an amusingly odd character. I don't think there's much else to say, really. We're pretty early on in the story. We're only 4 chapters in of, I think there's 50 something here. But yeah, I think we'll get something out of this in the long run. But yeah, the plan is from now on for Tuesday, or for my Torrid Tuesdays, to move over to just a more general romance. So we'll be carrying on with Emma until we finish the novel, which our current wait will be about 10 weeks, although I expect they'll push more on it later when there's less horrible heat and sunlight ruining my day. But yeah, it's probably going to be a couple of months. So, I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't think there's much else to say. I don't know that anyone is live at a rating, so I'll double check. That's proper. It's still live, okay. I guess I'll raid back in the library then. But yeah, as always, I do appreciate everyone for being here. I do hope you have a lovely rest of your day or night or evening or whatever the rest of the time is for you. And I wish you all the best. But yeah, and as always, ta-ra.